Let's welcome our next presenter, Isla Keeje. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. Who is going to talk about World Ocean Passive Acoustic Monitoring Project, opportunities for African involvement in exploring a day in the life of the world's ocean soundscapes.
Hi, it's Isla, Keeje, Davidson, but you were pretty close, so great. So thank you, everyone. So I'm going to talk about the World Oceans Passive Acoustic Monitoring Project, or WPAM for short. So just for our sort of origin story, so one thing that I just wanted to mention quickly is, as someone who's relatively new to bioacoustics, I've been really inspired by how passion-driven and collaborative this community is. And this is actually, I think, a pretty good example, as well as the conference that we're all in right now. So as we've heard today in the plenary, there's this real effort to try and have some of these libraries of what are the sounds that we're hearing beneath the surface. And so the Global Library of Underwater Biological Sound was created by a whole host of these partners. And from this, we had a select couple who decided, let's try and go a little further with that. And with some funding, also from the Richard Loudsbury Foundation, as well as other funders to fund my postdoc, we were able to take the brilliant creations of Miles Parsons, who we just heard speaking, Steve Simpson, and Aaron Rice to really create the World Oceans Passive Acoustic Monitoring Project. And what that is it's really this effort that to take the a day in the world of the underwater soundscapes. So we focus in on World Oceans Day. That's a day that since the United Nations sort of its conception of that in 1992 has really been a focus on sustainable development and also conservation, but also we're in the ocean decade right now, and through the Global Convention of Biological Diversity, there's that real push to protect 30% of land and sea by 2030. So this is a good space to really be trying to bring that attention into the oceans and explore that ocean sound space. And so what we did is we sort of tried to form the mission of WPAM, which was really to try and foster this global interdisciplinary community that are both recording, analyzing, and utilizing these underwater sounds, and to try and leverage this global perspective, this global collaborative effort to really bolster not only the scientific research, but also try to work towards some of the sort of a deeper affinity with the marine environments, explore that sense of connection, and also actually be really useful, if we can, towards supporting conservation action. And so this kind of formed some of our objectives. The first one, to advance some of the bioacoustic research, to really focus in on engagement, celebration, and participatory science, or citizen science, as well as really trying to see how can we make WPAM efforts really be useful for that conservation action. And so in our first year, we recorded with about 120 different collaborators around 300 global locations. And last year, we managed to get 180 different collaborators recording around 400 locations around the world, which I think is pretty good going, actually. So that was quite great to see people all working together in that capacity. And so when you're diving into these spaces and you're trying to think, okay, if you're trying to create this global snapshot, how do we represent these different areas? One thing that oh, it's already showing, that I was interested in thinking about is, okay, we know from this terrestrial example from eBird data that bird acoustic data sampled is not necessarily representing where you might find some of the peak diversity of these different species. And so when I was thinking about, okay, what's that perspective in the ocean space, there's a paper by Tittensaw, which was from 2010, that really tries to map out some of the diversity that we find across these different taxa, both in the ocean basins and the coastal regions. And so what does that mean when we're trying to think of this global perspective and this sampling effort, and are we representing everywhere equally? So here is, I think, a pretty cool graph by Kevin Darras, where they have this worldwide soundscapes effort. This was published this year to really try and show all of the passive acoustic monitoring efforts that they can have in their collaborative group. And what you can see here is that dotted line in the middle is the equator, and as you move outwards, either southwards or northwards of the equator, you can see both in altitude and in depth the recording efforts that have been taken and are present in this data set. And one thing just to highlight is, as you see that kind of intense clustering that you see there, that corresponds on the global map with, as Tess said, sort of Northern America and Europe. So really this is a great opportunity for us to really boost representation in areas that maybe aren't being part of these global initiatives as much. And so I wanted to kind of see how, how are some of the challenges that we're facing in aquatic bioacoustics? How can WPAM maybe work towards some of these? And so some people have some strong opinions about that. And so the first one, as we mentioned, was really uncovering some of these unknowns. So, amongst the community, there are probably millions of hours worth of recordings. And so a lot of that, at least in the marine mammals, we know quite a bit of what that is. There's quite a bit out there that we don't know. So really trying to work towards seeing whether for some of our objectives of advancing the bioacoustic research, can we figure out actually what is a lot of this? And so contributing to these sound libraries like the Global Library of Underwater Biological Sound, like Worldwide Soundscapes and Fish Sounds, as Audrey's going to speak about later, is really something where we think that this could be useful. But to do this, we really are going to need to start having some of these collective standardized annotation efforts, because there's a lot out there that we can detect and see, but we don't necessarily know what it is. So we need to start categorizing that. As well as having this growing data set with its associated metadata, how can we find a way that we can analyze that global perspective that's relevant, because you lose a lot of the detail, right? As we've heard, there's a lot of variation across sites, so when we're looking at this global perspective, what are some of the things we can tease apart to find useful patterns in there? And so what we're doing is this year we're having a WPAM workshop where we're really trying to invite all of our WPAM collaborators to come together and really actually be part of the decision-making process for this and help shape it. So identifying some of those key questions of what are some of the things we'd actually like to explore within this data set, what do we think are some of the most pertinent questions to answer first, and then establish some of those standardized protocols of how can we work on that, what are some of the best ways, should we run the calibrated data through Manta that we'll all have learned by that point how to use. In addition, how can we then, on top of contributing the data, who has capacity and interest for actually being part of that collaboration in writing some of these manuscripts and getting some of this out there as a research output? And also, what can we do better? What does WPAM still need to do? What does that next effort in 2025, how does that need to improve? And the more we have that community-driven decision-making, the more we have a structure to what we're doing that we can actually show through the data and through the story that we're telling as we engage more with participatory science. So there's this clear community message that we're bringing forward. And so one of the things that we've been working on a little bit is a fish finder. Now, we're not the only fish finder out there, but we're working with Acoustics, who are the AI whizzes, and they're using machine learning and AI to really try and focus in on how we can detect some of these zones of interest. Like where are the likely fish sounds that we're finding them? What are they? Potentially clustering them and even finding a way that we can categorize those. So we might not be able to attribute them to a species yet, but if they're all categorized in a standardized way, maybe we can go back to that later and it can be useful. And we've been working with some colleagues, Ben Williams, who works in partnership with Google and the AI team there, of seeing how can you then find these fish sounds, incorporate that into some of the work that they're doing with these restoration efforts. So that's maybe not focusing in as much on the specifics of the species, but then we can also tailor it back to try and get that biological relevance of what are the species that we're looking at. But this is only as useful as the data that we can have to work with it, right? And this is where Ashley has been amazing. She didn't see her face pop up on screen. Where she's been sharing a lot of her data from Mozambique and from Zanzibar so that we can make this fish finder relevant and more robust for data sets that are across the African continent, which that's not always the case. A lot of this is very data heavy in other regions. And so if we want it to perform as well as it can for members of the ABC, then we really want to have that data to train it and also be part of that back and forth of how can it work better? What do you want it to do? What do you want to see? Because we're with the acoustics people who can build that and build their model to actually try and replicate that for you. And in addition to that, actually comes that step of participatory science, of making some of this accessible. So we're in a room now where most of us, if not absolutely everyone, is pretty convinced that acoustics and sound is important, but there are many people who don't even realize there are sounds underwater. And Jacques Cousteau called it the silent world, right? And I still get told that quite often when I speak to people. So it's about sort of bringing in that engagement, that celebration of it, that fascination, the fact that it's still got a lot unknown, so you can be part of that discovery of what we're doing, you can contribute to the knowledge, and that can be really powerful for participatory science. And so to do that, we want to showcase the WPAM recordings, the sounds of interest that might come from those, and some of the visualizations in relation to that. And so we're building this interactive map right now that will hopefully have all of that pertinent, important information for the scientists in that community that are working on the bioacoustics, as well as have some of these creative expressions that might be interesting for people who don't want to know how to get down into the detail. And so I'm working with some really brilliant people in the National Center of Environmental Information based in NOAA who have this really great way of sorting through the metadata and bringing that into these maps so that you can actually access all of the information you need to use this for some of your bioacoustics work. But then I'm also working with some other partners like Jack Hines on how do we bring that visualization into maybe a little bit more of an expressive creative space as well. And so what I'd like to happen, and this is just a proof of concept, is you can hover over a particular data point and you can see who was the person responsible for contributing that data, in this case, the wonderful Ashley Lillis. And you can see, okay, what are some of the works, the recent papers that she's produced, and what's some of the work that she cares about. Perhaps there's a sound of interest of a snapping shrimp that you can find in this recording, and really bring to life not only the acknowledgement of the people who've contributed, but also what it actually takes to be part of a community to record all of these sounds. And so, and thing to add though is that Jack Hines is not only an ArcGIS whiz, he's also a musician and an artist. And so we're really trying to engage and have a community of creatives, musicians, and visual artists where we can see, okay, how do we form different forms of, alternative forms of engagement in addition to the research outputs that we're creating? And how do we explore this idea of what do we do to connect with sound and what we're hearing in these ocean environments? And so some of what this might be is just different ways of visualizing sound and bringing in sort of the acoustic symbols of what we're hearing. Some of it might be just actually knowing what you're listening to in the first place, depending on where you are in the world. And what we've done last year is we worked with a Colombian artist called Alejandro Bernal, who took the sounds that he that we'd recorded from our first ever effort, and he made an original score. Now, hopefully you'll be able to hear it. This is just a tiny little excerpt. It's all just sounds from the sea that he's used and played with. And the QR code should take you to it, but it's on our website too, if you're curious. Sorry, so that's just a little teaser for you. But we were thinking, well, let's make an album. Let's connect with a bunch of different musicians and artists from around the world and have different cultural and geographical perspectives on what it means to connect to these ocean sounds. Oh, sorry, I'm giving you a teaser to what you're about to read. So, and a final thing that we would really like to do is this not only to be sort of a celebration, but to genuinely try and make this as useful as it can be. And so this is incorporating this into some of the ongoing conservation strategies. And so this is a third objective that we have. And I've been having different conversations with different conservation partners or people who are conservation practitioners. And when they speak about bioacoustics more generally, often what they want to know is, okay, how can we get this indicator of ecosystem health? And I'm not going to go into the controversy of acoustic indices, but if we can get behind some of what the species that we're looking at, what's their presence, what is some of the important behaviors that we're seeing and perhaps being able to measure acoustically, and get a feeling for that population integrity, those will still be really useful indicators for that ecosystem health. Additionally, there is often a lot of interest in the indicators of threats or perhaps how close we might be coming to tipping points. And so bioacoustics works really well to monitor some of human activity across these various habitats. And finally, is it working what we're trying to do? So to really have this indicator of the effectiveness of the conservation strategy, we really need to be monitoring over time, over these different environmental contexts, to get a feel for, we've tried this, we've implemented this restoration effort. Did it work? Is it working? Should we carry on doing this? And so these are some of the things that I'm not saying that WPAM can do on its own, but perhaps what we can do is we can connect different experts from the WPAM community with conservation partners. For example, there might be people who really want to know within their MPA how many important species are spawning there. And acoustically, we can detect that, and there are experts who are really good at that. So maybe then that can be a partnership that can really take that forward. In addition, also, with WPAM being just a short snapshot of time, maybe it's a good space for people to trial bioacoustics. Does it work for them? Will it actually be able to help inform for their specific challenges that they're facing so that it can be better and improved towards conservation action? And so I just want to say thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear all of the diversity of work that's being done, and really actually invite anyone to consider signing up. It's a few days, it's World Oceans Day, and I'd really love it if that space that is often missing data points across the African continent could just be glowing with representation of the acoustic diversity that we have here and the people that are working really hard to promote that. So thank you. Please email me. Also, if you have any ideas or you think the whole idea is awful, please share it. I mean, let's learn, let's improve it. It is only as powerful as the community that contribute to it. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Isla. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions. Just to applaud.